Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm in between. I'm in my wife's office right now because my podcast room, I'm getting a podcast room for she and I. That's coming. But I'm finally able to have this conversation. My guest and I were kind of missing each other like over and over and over again. We're finally here to do it. My guest is a physics student, a writer, and a social media influencer, which we both said kind of like puts a weird taste in our mouth saying that, but it's true. He is known as Eric's Electrons. We connected on social media, and social media has so much potential, beautiful potential to link people together, to connect with people who are different than you and have similar interests and different interests and things like that. And that's how I find a lot of people to have these conversations with. And I'm excited to have one with you because we've interacted a lot just through like writing and stuff like that, but to actually have a conversation, I'm excited to. So Eric, welcome. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit to the audience, especially like what brought you to social media? I'm curious, like what brought you make that decision to like, okay, I'm going to go on, I'm going to like post and make comments and kind of dive myself into these culture wars and stuff like that. What made you make that decision? And tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, stuff like that.
First of all, thank you for having me on. I'm honored to be on your podcast. I'm a regular listener. And what first brought me on social media? Wow. So I would say in 2012, I started on social media, just getting on because I was very much into the atheist movement and everything that was going on with that from like 2009 to 2012. And in 2012 is when it hit like a roadblock in a way. It was like when the Titanic hit the iceberg. That's when the atheist movement like got that major hit and started sinking. And I was really curious of why it was sinking. And when I looked into it, it was because social justice crept into it through various means, and then all these little scandals happened, and that was very interesting to me. It was very interesting to me that these on the surface groups like feminism and all this other stuff, they had stuff that I really agreed with, but the way they went about it was really wrong. And they took it way too far. Like one instance was Elevator Gate. That happened to a feminist named Rebecca Watson.
And Dawkins, right?
Yeah. She was at a real quick story about it. She was at an atheist conference. It was real late at night. She went to an elevator. A guy followed her into the elevator. He asked her to go to her room, romantically, I guess. And then she got really scared about that, but said no. He didn't pursue her after that. She went to her room, and then she blogged about it the next morning. And that blog blew up, and it kind of split the atheist movement apart because people felt like her reaction to that, because she was saying basically that the atheist conferences were riddled with all of this misogyny and everything. So getting into that conversation, it was very interesting and eye-opening to me. And then eventually it led me to Instagram years later. And I started doing science communication anonymously, where I would like debunk scientific falsehoods that would come out about flat Earth, about like anti-GMO stuff, anti-vaccine efforts at the time, and anti-stem cell research efforts. And there were really people on there doing that. But then I think in 2015 is when I made myself known, and I put my actual picture up. And now, fast forward years later, here I am.
Yeah. That's really interesting because a lot of people seem to have followed that similar path within like the new atheist movement. Before we get into the stuff that I want to talk to you about specifically as a scientist, I have this like theory that I'm still working out that you'd be a perfect person to ask about. So atheism, the way I see it is like two different branches of it. So I'm going to just give you my thoughts, and then you can pick it apart. Let me know what you think. So there's two different kinds of atheists. One would be the atheists who are looking for essentially like looking for answers. Like they want So they're looking for answers and how to live and stuff like that. And then those would go into the woke side, but then there's the ones who are okay searching for the answers but not finding them, like the ones who are okay just having questions never be answered. And that would be like the more scientific, that's the Dawkins, that's probably more the way you are, Colin Wright, Peter Boghossian type, is like, we're not going to get answers to everything in the world. And I'm okay with that because I'm a searcher. I'm okay not having an anchor of what reality is. And I can live with that and be okay. But then there's other atheists that are just looking for like, tell me what is for everything. And what they're looking for is essentially religion. And, the concept is we have this jar inside of us, this container for belief in a higher power. And if maybe everyone doesn't, but a lot of people do, and you'll fill that up with something that'll give you answers. So I'm still working it out. That's a little sloppy, but does that kind of like make sense to some degree?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. To me, what I see a lot of atheists that the former that you described, they have a more of an arrogance about what they know, like they think that they know something, and they actually don't have a big idea or a clear idea of what they think they know, and that's what they beat everyone over the head with. And they, in a way, they're being religious, just like the people on the theist side. So, and what I see too is often those types tend to get into social justice groups because they fulfill that need of having a higher power, and that higher power is equality or equity. And I have a little social theory about that too, but I'm no social theorist, so I don't take that too seriously. But yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, because morality is a tricky one to answer through science. Like science can tell you an is, but it's hard to pull an ought from science. But some people are okay with that, and I think that like a lot of scientists are okay with that. It's like, yeah, we're gonna leave things unanswered, and that's okay. And other people are like, no, we have to. So it can get really mixed. So you're a physics student, so you study physics. Physics is a hard science, and I think what I want to address with you is you seem to take that scientific approach. When people say like believe the science is a process. It's a scientific method, right? Like it's hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, analysis. Like you seem to take that with kind of everything, like whatever it is, like everything in life. Is that accurate? Is that kind of the way that you approach things? Like you think you have like a scientific mind where you follow the scientific method in some form or another with the way you make sense of the world in general?
I mean, I'm human, so naturally, it's not it's very hard to just change into a scientific mindset. But when you train yourself, you start putting yourself in a scientific mindset when it comes to different things. So yeah, in a way, I try my best to think of things in a scientific way, but I can't help that I'm human, and I feel just like everyone else. I get angered just like everyone else. So naturally, just like everyone else, I jump to conclusions. But the training part comes in when I start questioning and when I investigate, and that's the difference, I would say, in what makes me a scientist is the training that allows me to ask the right questions to guide myself towards the most accurate approximation of reality.
Yeah, I mean, you have to curb your emotions because physics. Maybe there are physicists who are like emotionally attached to the results.
Oh, 100%.
Oh, so give me
There's a book
examples
on
of
that.
that. Okay, give me some examples of like a physicist who'd be like very emotionally connected. Like, I want this result to be the result, so they kind of can skew the science and stuff like. Because that's what we see in social science so much.
I think the biggest blunder that we could point to is Einstein. He was doing his relativistic equations, and he found out that the universe wasn't static. But he was like, wait, hold on. The universe has to be static. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, what are these equations saying? So he changed his equations in a way to make it seem static, even though naturally through his first calculations, the universe was expanding, and it was accelerating. So when Hubble came out with his data and he showed Einstein had to go back and be like, oh well, it was wrong for me to put this in, and since this new data came in, I have to change my mind about it. So that's one of many different times where scientists wanted a result to be something, and they changed it, but it ended up being the opposite once they came across new data. And there's a great book on a lot of this. I think it's called Brilliant Blunders by Mario Livio, I think. And he talks about that. He talks about that particular one with Einstein and many more. But physicists are very into their theories, that they get attached to beautiful theories.
Mm-hmm. Ego, that makes sense. Yeah. Or like, so Einstein, his calculations were right, but his gut was wrong.
Yeah. There we go. That's perfect.
Interesting. Yeah. And your gut, that's so that gets us into like a lot of, you comment a lot on racial issues. Mm-hmm. And I go into that world and I'm like super white and everything. And I don't know, because I take the approach of like, I'm just trying to figure things out. But what I've found doing this podcast, Eric, is really interesting is identity really matters. I have had on a bunch of different transgender people. And what's interesting is when I have a transgender person on, I say like, how do you identify? They say, I'm trans, I'm, whatever gender it is. I'm an activist. And those are like the top ones. Then I've had other transgender people like Corinna Cohn, who says, I am a writer, I'm a computer software engineer, I'm a cat lover, and then lower down is being trans. And what I found is the way that they approach trans issues and stuff is very, very different. So if you identify as this thing and that thing is being what is perceived as an attack, you see it as an attack on yourself and you get very, very defensive because you feel like they're attacking. Like if you're a vegan, my wife was a vegan for a couple of years and she wasn't for any like moral reasons. It was just easier for her to eat that way. So if you present her with information about habitat loss or, small animals being destroyed or whatever it is, or health reasons, she'd be like, interesting. But if your name is, vegan girl 35 on Instagram, you get those same things. It's like, but now you're coming after me, and they get kind of vicious back on the approach. So I guess, where do you fall on that thing of like, if someone would ask you how you identify, like, what are the markers for you that's like, is it like racial? Is that the top? Is it at the bottom? Is it just like mixed in? I'm just curious, like, and then where is it being a physicist? Where is it being like, where do you kind of like hang your hat on who you are?
On the top is just human, that's the part that where I'm just like, it's obvious. To me, being human is so much. There's so many things that comes with that. So that encompasses everything already. I think racial categories are very sloppy. So I don't have and then I have experience with so many different Black people where I'm so different than them that I know that there isn't like a shared Blackness or, whatever. And I grew up in a very diverse environment. I grew up in the Bay Area. So in the Bay Area, there are Filipinos, there are people who are Chinese, there are people who are white, there are people who are Jamaican, Haitian, from Nigeria. There's so many people from all over the place, and you get to talk to them. You get to go in their homes, you eat their food, and it's just like we have shared things as humans. But when it comes to good and bad people, that comes in any race, color, gender, size, and I don't highly value racial category, just like I would highly value my sex as a male. It's not that important to me.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that. I had Sheena Mason on the podcast, her whole theory of racelessness, and it was like, yeah, especially because I think it's inevitable with the interactions and stuff like that, we're less insulated. We're all over the place. That, as you said, you put it well, like racial categories are getting really mixed up and sloppy. Like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like, most of my friends have biracial kids in one category or another. So I don't know. It's a weird time to have this resurgence of a focus on race, because we've never been more, like mutts. We're all kind of mixed up, and we can now prove it now with, DNA tests and all that kind of stuff. I just got my DNA test. I'm very white. When it comes to science, the Democratic Party they're kind of broadcast themselves as the party of science, but then they promote, and I'm not just like knocking the Democrats, Republicans, I can go off on them too, but like, I'm pretty politically homeless, but it's interesting to label yourself as the party of science, because if you do that, you got to do science. Like, you can't just say that you're this thing and then not do it. If you say you're the party of the working class, you got to actually show up. Now, if you say you're the party of identity, which I think would be pretty accurate, doing Pia Milani's concept, like that's, I think, pretty accurate for the Democrats. But say the party of science, like, do you follow the scientific method? Like, does it get frustrating? I guess my question is, does it get frustrating for you as someone who thinks like a scientist to see people just following what one expert says and saying that's science when it's not? Like, how do you deal with this, like this conflation of, what science is actually and what it is kind of portrayed to be, I guess, is the question.
I think just as a physicist alone, like looking at headlines of, oh, this asteroid is coming by very close to Earth, it may hit Earth. You get those headlines like every 6 months or so. That's annoying enough. But when you see people do the whole like follow the science, follow this person because they're an expert type thing, and it's so frustrating. It's very frustrating. It's even more frustrating to me when I see other scientists like back that type of stuff. Because I'm like, you guys should know better. You do know better, but your political blinders are on, and you're not allowed to think critically, or not. You're not allowing yourself to think critically. So you're just repeating everything that's happening instead of when scientists talk about things like amongst themselves, they'll, let's say that they'll criticize Fauci, they'll criticize health officials, but when they talk in public, it's totally different. And I instruct scientists all the time, you need to start talking in public, just like how you do in private. But a lot of them, what it is they know that if they criticize, like, let's say if they criticize Dr. Fauci or something, they'll be deemed, or it will be deemed as like a right-wing talking point. And they're afraid of getting that like social scarlet letter on them. And then, they're afraid that their friends or family will kind of like excommunicate them because they might be right wing, because I think that's the worst thing to a lot of them, because many of them lean left. So I get more frustrated at the scientists, more so than just people in general, who kind of sit around and allow people just to say follow the science, and they discourage questioning of any type. Because if you were to question a physicist about gravity, they're not going to try to advocate for fact checker markers on social media and you to be censored. If you try to question a biologist about germ theory, that they wouldn't like try to excommunicate you or anything. But if you try to say something against the things that were happening for the last 2 years, a lot of times you would get called anti-vax, you would get called anti-science, right-wing, all the names, you would get called. And that's the unfortunate part. And I really blame that largely on scientists.
So from what you've seen in like your world, does the ideology, is it just the public, or does it creep into the lab? Because I'm concerned that ideology, and it can be, I think the pendulum's going to swing. I think there could be right-wing elements of this too, like data on climate change and stuff like that paid for by oil companies. But when is this ideology getting into the universities, the institutions, in the hard sciences like physics? Or do you feel like, all right, it's not gotten to us yet? Because I see like stuff on Twitter about like, 2 + 2 = 5, like that kind of like nonsense. But I don't know how much of that is inflated, kind of stuff, or how much of that's actually going on in the academy.
Well, in physics, it's very hard to put social justice or just anything to let that creep into the actual data, because we're talking usually about high energies or on a quantum scale of things, and it requires a whole bunch of math and all this other stuff. So it's not creeping in that way, but it is creeping into the field in ways where like the people who run the National Science Foundation, they're highly motivated by social justice. So they'll make everyone sign forms talking about their dedication to social justice. Or in the astrophysics conference or meeting or something like that, I remember there was this physicist by the name of Dr. Chanda Prescott Weinstein, I think. She advocated for physicists to talk about social justice in their conference or in their lectures about astrophysics. It has nothing to do with social justice or anything, and she wants this mandatory. And she's a part. I'm not sure if she's a part of the Physics Association or National Science Foundation, but she's one of the people on the board for that, and she's heavily into the social justice efforts about that. She believes in decolonizing science from white people, and that we need to change up the methods of how we teach science in order to reach Black people and other like lesser represented people. So it has creeped in, but luckily it hasn't creeped into the data yet. What I have seen, someone, a really known physicist, he reported why there may be gender disparities at the LHC, which is a Large Hadron Collider. And he was basically like canceled for that. Like they took him off of their thing for that. Like he wasn't allowed back there. He tried to he wrote a paper about it and everything. He tried to submit it to physics journals since it dealt with women in physics, and it was denied by top physics journals because of how controversial it was. And so it's definitely creeped in ideologically, but it hasn't influenced the data of the important stuff, at least yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And where I see it is like K through 12 is a lot of the decolonization of math stuff is not teaching kids math. I can't imagine the advanced kind of math that you have to do in this crazy astrophysics world. Like I struggle with like quick math at the grocery store. Like this is so complex. This is really hard. And to make it unnecessarily hard is just a fool's errand, because they're not doing that in our I mean, I don't know if you want to say like we're in competition on a global scale with China or whatever. Like they're not talking about that stuff. They're cranking out hard math. They're doing equations all the time.
Yeah, and people are going over there just to escape the social justice stuff from over here. I know physicists personally who now live over there or near there, and they're doing programs over there because they want to escape everything that's going on in America and Europe.
Oh, that's a real problem. The part of science and what is provable or what is true, because that's one of the ways I explain it to my students, because they're like, I hate science class. So like, science class, don't think of it as science class. Think of it as trying to figure out what this world is, this crazy place that we're in, this computer program, trying to understand it better. And part of that is making things replicable. Like is the pen gonna drop? What about this time? Oh, okay. Now it's starting to show up a little bit. And consistency. So within language and stuff like that, I just put a post up on my Instagram about pregnancy and like, can men be pregnant? And a lot of this stuff, whether it's like taking definitions, so it could be about what a woman is, or it could be about what violence is, or what racism is, or any of this stuff, they're changing the definition so quickly that if we don't have a shared language, then we're not going to be able to communicate. We're not going to be able to understand one another. And it's just misunderstandings are inevitable. But we lose any kind of sense of consistency or replicating it. So then we're going to lose any sense of what is real. And that's like a concern from my end, what I'm kind of observing here. Do you see that? Or what are your thoughts on that kind of way that people are fiddling with language?
I think that's a tactic to obfuscate and weaponize the conversation, you know, because when you change the language and you make it so where, you know, your hypothesis is unfalsifiable, then you could do anything. You know, if you change, for instance, racism to mean prejudice plus power, and power could mean anything, even if, because like, let's say, because I would tell people with that definition, well, what about President Barack Obama, who was, you know, at the highest point of power, you know, the president of the United States of America. And and I was like, what about him to like the average white person? And the way they redefined power in that way made it so it made sense to say that he has less power than the average white person, even though that's just ridiculous. So I just think that that's a very strategic tactic of people to change the language and to discourage discourse. It's all about discouraging discourse, because if you could change the language and talk amongst yourself to other people who agree with you and have that same language or a similar language, because they don't even agree with one another a lot of times.
Right.
If you could just have a similar language, then you could just make anything up. And that's what they've been doing for the last like 30 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's like, well, we're talking about structural power. It's like structure. Structure is the government then. That's institutions, right? I mean, Nicole Hannah-Jones talking about how she's fighting the power while she's having, you know, lunch with Oprah and has a Netflix deal and a Pulitzer Prize. It's like, whoa, like what are we talking about here? You are the power.
Yeah.
But they can't see that because I guess their identity is attached to fighting the power.
And their salary, and it's just, you know, the salary part is really important here. I'm not like trying to make it so like, you know, oh, because they make money we can't trust them. No, like their salary motivates where they lie at, you know, because if they change their mind and they stop believing what they believe, they will stop getting money. I mean, look at BLM, for instance, with the whole like money missing or unaccounted for. And we all know that they're pocketing it, and it's unfortunate. And a lot of us called it out in the very beginning because they weren't being transparent in the beginning, and that should have been a red flag to people. But yeah, I mean that's what it's about. It's about obfuscating. It's about stopping civil discourse, and it's focused a lot on their salaries and how much they're making.
That Upton Sinclair quote, it's difficult to get a man to believe something when his salary depends on him not believing it.
It's so dead on.
You know what? All right, so let me just try and push back on that, because I agree with you, but I think that there's a potential in someone, let's just take someone who, you know, is in this world, like Ibram X. Kendi. If Ibram X. Kendi, you know what, sat down, had some conversations and had like an epiphany, goes, you know what, I'm wrong. I am wrong. Now, his community would feel very upset and he would lose a lot of stuff, but he also, as a scientist, like don't you want your theory to be proven wrong to some degree? If you take your ego out of it, because why would you want to promote a bad theory? And that's the way I feel like I've hacked some of this stuff, is I'm constantly looking to be proven wrong. because my ego is not connected with having the right answers, it's to getting to the right answers. And if someone in a position of power changed, it would be a massive positive change and it'd be a uniting force. I don't know. I feel like there could be more opportunities there. I don't think they should pull a Dave Rubin and go to the other ideological side, but to become aware of the flaws in your own argument. You could argue that that's going to actually strengthen you and maybe even help your salary, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and that's essentially what scientists want. Scientists usually want to, they want to themselves show that they're wrong. You know, if they propose a theory, they want to be the ones to strike down that theory with something more accurate. So yeah, that's a natural like feature in science, is to want to be wrong because you want to get to the closest approximation of reality that you can get to.
Yeah. The way that people guard and protect their bad ideas, their flowered ideas, the way that, just to take Ibram X. Kendi, like when Coleman Hughes asked him to come on and they donate money, and the fact that he ignored that, like that's crazy to me. It's so obvious to me. It's so obvious that you don't actually have confidence in your theory. It's so obvious.
It's a lack of lack of intellectual humility as well, and it shows that the humanities, they're really missing a lot of training in critical thinking and scientific literacy in general. I really think that that's what's lacking in that field, and that anti-intellectual thought of ignoring people, because I mean, we both have tried to reach out to people in academia and ask them questions and possibly get them on so we could better understand their theories, and it's been like pulling teeth. And but if you were to do that with a physicist, you were questioning gravity or something like that, it would be very easy, and you have to ask yourself why. And I think it's what you just said. They don't have confidence in their theories. They really don't. They don't have confidence. They just think that they're right, and that if everyone were to get on their program, the world would be just such a better place. And they're wrong.
Yeah, you would think, maybe like looking at the two of us side by side, you would think like, oh, well, Eric would have a lot easier time talking to some of these social justice warriors and stuff. You might have an even more difficult time because at least with me, they can throw that, the whole conversation I had with like those CRT educators, like they can always just throw like, well, you're just a cishet white man at me. And they can't play that card with you. So then,
can't.
So then they have to actually deal with what you're saying, and then it becomes a real mess.
And it's a mess because they assume that I agree with them because of my skin color. So they assume, and they'll say certain things, and then when I start questioning them, or I ask certain questions that are popular on the opposite side, they quickly understand, like, oh shoot, he isn't one of us. And he may be against our best interest. Excuse me. He may be against our best interest. So it's like I'm caught in a crossfire in a way.
For sure. Yeah. So just because we have to cut this a little short, but what's on the agenda for you? You're a young man, aren't you? How old are you?
31.
Yeah. Like what? So I'm an elder statesman. I'm going to be 40 this summer. But what's your plan? Because promoting science, promoting like actual science and like scientific thinking and stuff like that's so important. And for you to go out about it the way you do on social media, I'm obviously a big proponent of social media. I think it can be done in a really beautiful way. It's gross, but you make it a little bit less gross. I'm hoping to make it a little bit less gross. The people I bring on here generally are people who I think are making it a little bit less gross. What's like your plan as far as like what you're going to be doing in like a public space to try and promote this kind of stuff that you do? Do you have like a 5-year, 10-year plan for how you're going to go about this or turn into a bigger career?
I definitely want to do YouTube a lot more. I don't want to just be on Instagram and Twitter responding to people and having comment battles. I want to start bringing people on and having conversations like these. And I also want to show the the volunteering work that I do outside. I do a lot of volunteering work on the outside, where I'm advocating for more scientific literacy and literacy in general. I think the lack of literacy in our country or in the world in general is behind a lot of the nastiness we see on social media and why people act the way they act. You know, I think 2014 or 2016 data says the average person reads at 7th to 8th grade reading and writing level or something like that. And that's terrible. You know, that's really, really bad. And we need to raise that up. And, you know, so I just want to be able to show people that, present science in a more entertaining way, but mix it up with other things, and also just get into other things I really enjoy versus the controversial stuff. You know, I'm really into music, for instance. So I plan to have like a channel about music and going deep into that. And I have this large plan of doing stuff, but it's a lot.
Yeah, well, that's sort of Renaissance man. I mean, that's the what was it? Walter Isaacson, is that his name? He does write those good biographies. He finds a lot of them. They're not just good at one thing; they're good at a whole bunch of things, because getting better at music is actually going to help you do better physics, which is actually going to help you do it's interesting how that just opens up all these channels of the brain. When you mention literacy, real quick, I just want to say I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's something that I've been talking a lot about with other educators. When you can't read well and understand what's being said, then what happens is you rely on people to explain it to you. And then they're going to put their little slant on it, and then you adopt that slant. And I agree, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, of that's a big problem with what we see on social media and what we see with these ideologies, because they're just deferring to, oh, well, this person read this thing, so I'm just going to listen to them, as opposed to actually being able to read it and understand it themselves. That's really, really important.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah. So where can people find you, follow what you're doing and everything like that?
Most channels, it's like on Twitter at Eric's Electrons, Instagram at Eric's Electrons. On Minds, I think on Minds I'm just Eric Electron. I tried to change my name, but I don't think they allow that yet. And on YouTube, Eric's Electrons.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you for coming on here, man. We're going to keep in touch, and I hope that people check out what you're doing and kind of follow along, because I'm sure that in the coming years, what your work is going to be really influential. I think, especially for young people, you know, to bring it up, to take a scientific approach to things, I think we need it. So I really appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation with me, man.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.